What the fuck is this? Let's go. I got infinity words. Let's see how much that annoying girl has.
Hey, how many words do you have?
Infinity.
I have 7.
And we could be together, baby.
What the fuck? Why is it going faster? She's only 9 pro. Oh, thank goodness it stopped.
Lex. Oh my god, Lex, answer now. What do you want? I just wanted to tell you that I'm getting grounded. What? Why? Because I yelled at my sister and she started crying. Oh, how long will you be grounded? I don't know, but I have to go. Bye. Bye.
Roblover Sam has left the chat.
I can't believe he's grounded. I'll just wait for him.
5 years later.
What is this? Roblox? Oh my god, I remember this game. What is this character? Let me buy some Robux. Better. I wonder how much friends 10-year-old me had. Only one. Wow, I must have been a loser. Animal lover Lex 3? She's online, let's join her.
Your friend Roblover Sam has joined the experience.
Roblover Sam? Sounds familiar.
Hey, are you Lex?
Yes, and do I know you?
I think so. I haven't played this in 5 years.
In mind 5 years, that's a long time ago. Wait, did you get grounded?
Yeah, I did, so I guess you do remember me.
Oh my god, we used to play all the time. I'll add you in my GC.
And then I was like,
Oh, hi Lex.
Hi, baby.
Who's this?
Oh, he's just a friend from when we were younger.
Oh, then why don't we introduce ourselves? My name is Michael, but you can call me Mike.
my name is Layla.
And my name is Lex, which you already know.
If you know, you know.
Nice to meet you guys. My name is Samuel, but I go by Sam. Do you guys want to do age and face reveal?
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm 16 and this is me.
Nice.
Handsome.
Hot.
I'm 15 and this is me.
Okay.
You like what you see.
Anyway, 15, and this is me.
Handsome.
Pretty.
Oh my god, marry me, baby.
Sorry, I don't like you Megamind, I mean Layla.
I'm Lex, I'm 15, and this is me.
Pretty.
So hot BBG.
Ugly.
I know you are not talking with your ugly ass built like Mega Mind with that big ass forehead of yours.
Samina mina, waka waka, samina mina sangalewa, anawam
Shut up.
Anyway, you guys wanna play too?
Yes.
Yeah.
Anything for you, Sammy, baby.
Don't call me that.
Sorry, baby.
In 2.
Lex and Mike private chat me.
Okay.
Okay.
What about me?
No.
Ugh, okay.
Do you guys want to team and kill Layla every round?
Yes, she gets on my nerves. I don't know why she is in the GC.
Sure.
Okay, let's go back. Hey, we're back.
Finally, you guys took forever. What was taking so long?
Nothing.
Okay, let's get back to the game. Bro, why would you kill me? I'm not murderer.
How would I have no?
Lala private chat me.
Okay.
So they are teaming to get you mad.
What did I do?
I have no idea, but look at this.
What the fuck? She's my best friend.
I know she's been acting like this since that Sam boy came along.
Is there any way to get rid of him?
Yes and no. We can't get rid of them, but they can get rid of us. I'm going to break up with Lex. I don't know how to tell you, but I love you, and I always have.
Me too.
So do you want to be together?
Of course, Mikey Wikey.
Okay, let's go back.
Hey, you remember Lex, I have to tell you something.
What is it, baby?
I'm breaking up with you, I love Lala.
What, why?
I just told you I love Lala.
In mine now is my chance to tell Lex I love her. Lex I lo.
Ha ha ha, loser Lex, I stole your man.
What were you saying, Sam?
Nothing.
Oh, okay, well, I liked you ever since we were younger.
Oh my god, I like you too. So do you want to be my girlfriend?
Ratio
Yes, of course.
123.456.789.13.
Wow.
Ratio.
I mean, what the fuck?
Did you guys hear that?
Yeah, it sounded like a little kid.
Yeah, I wonder who.
Ratio.
I'm going to check who was talking while it happened. I'll be back.
Mike, you're a backstabber. How could you do that to Lex?
Shut up, American.
American isn't an insult.
Whatever, go eat burgers or something.
Go drink some tea.
I'm back. And I don't know how to say this, but it was Layla. She is the little kid.
What? No, I'm not 6.
Wait, what? I'm not a pedo.
I'm not 6.
Seems like you are.
Yeah, you really are, so show your real face.
Fine. This is me.
Ratio.
Wow, you are even uglier than your fake photo.
Ratio.
Do you still love me, Mikey Boo?
Yes, I do.
What? That's a whole case. I'm calling the cops.
Wait, don't. The reason I love her still is because
I am also 6.
Ratio.
What the fuck?
Really, I love you, Mikey baby. Me too.
Thiluv Layla was removed from the group.
No, my baby.
That Boymic was removed from the group.
I can't believe you were dating a 6-year-old.
I don't want to talk about it.
Wanna meet up? I'll buy you some ice cream.
Sure, see you there.
Mike and Layla soon realized they were related and break up.
Ratio.
Sam and Lex get good luck and become rich. One day Sam goes to his friend's house and sees Layla. The end.
Ratio.